Well, hello there. How is everyone? You amazing, beautiful, wonderful people. It's Monday, baby. It's Monday. New week. And you know what they say? New week, new opportunities. Let's see what happens. Like I say, you're looking absolutely amazing. I'm going to get straight into the meat and potatoes. Look, I've learned some things over the coverage of the Idaho 4 case. I've heard that some people just hear what they want to hear. They hear what they want to hear. They see what they want to see, and they don't defer from that, regardless of what they're told, what they're shown, anything whatsoever. Their belief construct is rigid, and it doesn't matter how much you show them information on the contrary. It just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You might as well be pissing into the wind because you're not going to make a dent in their thought construct. It is what it is. But one thing that has made me, how can I say, with respect to the Idaho 4 case, to doubt what we're being told. You know, a lot of people turn around and they say to me, do you think Brian Koberger did it? The truth is, I don't know whether he did it. And I'll tell you why I don't know whether he did it, English, not my first language, is because I've not been shown that he did it. I've not been proven beyond a reasonable doubt to be satisfied that Brian Koberger is the sole perpetrator in the Idaho 4 case. And as more and more information comes out, there are more things that raises doubt and doesn't concrete or solidify guilt, which I would have expected to happen. Even the prosecutor himself has led me to believe that even he wasn't convinced. And I've said this multiple times. I'm getting to the point now where it's becoming repetitive. But in this video, I just want to delve on something which goes up against the narcotics angle, because the narcotics angle seems to be where a lot of people are heading, where they lead to what they believe happened. And I personally believe that the narcotics angle is a cop-out. It's easy to blame narcotics. It's easy to say a gang did it. This was gang retaliation. When in fact, there is other evidence that's glaringly obvious, staring you in the face, that people don't want to acknowledge, or they don't want to accept or even consider has the potential of being something to do with this murder at the University of Idaho campus, or just off campus. And that is the fraternities. And why do I bring up the fraternities? I bring up the fraternities because in the Idaho 4 case, we have a scenario that would suggest that there was a fight. There was an argument, and we have evidence where these fights and these arguments, they turn violent. And then they're hidden up. They're covered up. Case in point, again, Timmy Reed. If you've been around the channel for a while, you will remember the story of Timmy Reed. You know, there was some kind of argument, and around 50 students would turn up at his residence, and it would result in him being beaten and put in hospital. Subsequently, the college trying to hide it until his family sought legal intervention privately, and then it kind of went completely off radar. So I can only imagine that there was a potential payoff. Again, that's speculation, but that's how it looks to me. It looks like potentially this was handled out of the public eye and likely satisfactorily financially compensated for the issue. But if we look at this, right, so this is what people have to consider and they have to remember, and it's this, right? It talks about here, it says, while the system has its share of poets, athletes, Henry James scholars, it's far more famous for its success in the powerhouse fraternity fields of business law and politics. An astonishing number of CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, congressmen, male senators, American presidents have belonged to fraternities. Many more thousands of American men count their fraternal experience and the friendships made within it as among the most valuable of their lives. The organizations raise millions of dollars for worthy causes, contribute millions of hours in community service, and seek to steer young men towards lives of service and honourable action. They also have a dark, dark history of violence against their own members and visitors to their houses, which makes them in many respects at odds with the core mission of the colleges itself. It says lawsuits against fraternities are becoming a growing matter of public interest, in part because they record such lurid events, some of them ludicrous, many more of them horrendous. But for every butt bomb, there's a complaint of manslaughter, the R word. You can see it on screen. The S word, torture, psychological trauma. A recent series of articles on fraternities by Bloomberg News' David Gloven and John Heschinger notes that since 2005, more than 60 people, the majority of them students, have died in incidents linked to fraternities, which is a sobering number in itself, but one that is dwarfed by the number of serious injuries, assaults, the S word, crimes, and regularly take place in these houses. Many people believe that violent hazing is the most dangerous event associated with fraternity life, but hazing causes a relatively small percentage of these injuries because of a variety of forces. All this harm and the behaviours that led to it has lately been moving out of the shadows of private disciplinary hearings and silent suffering and into the bright light of civil lawsuits. Note civil lawsuits. And again, why is it important to understand that this is civil lawsuits? Because the fraternities and the colleges have a relationship with law enforcement, so it doesn't turn criminal. If someone's beaten to death, beaten half to death, or left with life-altering injuries, how is that not a legal issue? How is that not turn into a legal battle where somebody can, face prison for nearly beating someone to death or for somebody dying? Because a lot of the time it's hidden, and it takes a civil lawsuit to be raised. And if we carry on reading through this document here, it actually goes on to speak specifically about the University of Idaho and the University of Washington. Let me get down here. The campuses of Washington State University and the University of Idaho are located some 8 miles apart in the vast agricultural region of the Northwest known as the Palouse. It was at the latter institution that the 19-year-old sophomore and newly minted Delta 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 pledge Amanda Anderverde arrived in August of 2009. Although she had scarcely moved into the Tri Delta house and registered for classes before she was at the center of events that would leave her with brain damage and cast her as the plaintiff in a major lawsuit filed on her behalf by her devastated parents. It would have been an unremarkable Wednesday evening focused on kind of partying and hooking up that are frequent pleasures of modern sorority women, save for its hideous end. Anda Verdi and her sorority sisters began the night at Sigma Chi, where the sorority ladies drank alcohol and spent the evening with dates they had been assigned during a party game. The language of Andaverdi's legal complaint often seems couched in a combination of 50s lingo and polite euphemism, intended perhaps to preclude a conservative Idaho jury from making moralistic judgments about the plaintiff's behaviour. I do apologise for the cat that's consistently meowing. Will you be quiet? The charms of Andaverdi's assigned date ran thin, apparently because close to midnight she left him and made her way over to the Sigma Alpha Epsilon house, where she quickly ended up on the third floor sleeping porch. Many fraternity houses, especially older ones, have sleeping porches, sometimes called cold airs or rack rooms, typically located on the top floor of the building's gable ends. They are large rooms filled with bunks, some of which which are stacked in triple tiers, and their large windows are often left open, even in the coldest months. Many fraternity members have exceedingly fond memories of their time on the porches, which they view, like so many fraternity traditions, as a simultaneously vexing and bonding experience. Although these group sleeping arrangements were once considered an impediment to a young man's sex life, the hookup culture in which privacy is no longer a requirement of sexual activity has changed that, and the sleeping porch existence is once again coming into favor. For many reasons, sleeping porches feature in a number of lawsuits, pointing to an astonishing fact. Despite fraternity houses' position as de facto residence halls for so many American college students, safety features are decidedly spotty. About half of them don't even have fire sprinklers. That pursuing a bachelor's degree might be something other than a deeply ascetic and generally miserable experience was once a prosperous idea. According to the complaint, shortly after arriving at SAE, Andaverdi ran into a friend of hers and he took her up to the sleeping porch where he introduced her to a pal of his named Joseph Cody Cook. Andaverdi and Cook talked and climbed into Cook's bunk where the two began kissing. At this point, that the language of the suit finally frees itself from euphemism and reveals the fearsome power of the unambiguous declarative sentence. Amanda rolled onto her shoulder towards the exterior wall and suddenly, quickly, and unexpectedly dropped off Cook's mattress into the open exterior window, falling from the third floor sleeping porch to the cement approximately 25 feet below. The injuries were devastating and included permanent brain damage. Andaverdi was airlifted to a trauma center in Seattle, where she remained for several weeks. In the early days of her care, it seemed she might not survive. Eventually, however, she improved enough to leave the hospital and was transferred to a series of rehabilitation centers, where she spent many months learning to regain basic functions. Police interviewed about the case defended themselves the way police departments in college towns all over the country reasonably defend themselves when accused of not preventing a fraternity house disaster. Further concrete in the fact that the fraternities, the sororities, the colleges, and the law enforcement establishments in these areas have a close relationship, and hence why we see civil lawsuits and not criminal ones. We just can't send undercover people into private houses or private parties, said David Duke, the Moscow, Idaho assistant chief of police. Local news outlets covered Andaverdi's plight wildly and sympathetically, although the optimism with which her miraculous recovery was celebrated was perhaps exaggerated. A television news report dedicated to that miracle revealed a young woman who, while she had escaped death, had clearly been grievously injured. And the reporter interviewed her mother. Andaverdi sat in a wheelchair. When her hands were not propped on the black lap tray latched to the chair, she struggled to grasp a crayon and run it across the pages of a children's colouring book, or to place the 6 large pieces of a simple puzzle, square, triangle, circle, into their spaces. She eventually improved from this desperate state, learning to walk and dress herself, but she was a far cry from the student of veterinary medicine that she once had been. The local inclinations to see a badly injured college student as a figure deserving of community support and to view even a limited recovery as evidence of the goodness of God and not aligned with regional preferences for self-reliance and for taking responsibility for one's own actions. However dire the consequences. Now it says the inevitable court case in which the Andaverdi family named not only SAE and Tri Delta as defendants, but also the University of Idaho and the Idaho State Board of Education was dismissed on summary judgment because there was no dispute that Andaverdi fell out of an open window, and because there was no evidence of an inherently dangerous condition in the house. That window was open and was obvious to anyone who walked into that room. The court determined that no other person or institution had a duty to protect Amanda from the actions and decisions. The decision to drink alcohol as a minor, the decision to climb onto the bunk, the impulse to roll over that led to her accident. Andaverdi's case seemed to me to be an isolated tragedy until I sent away to the Latah County Courthouse for a copy of the complaint and discovered within it this sentence: Amanda's fall was a second fall of a student from an upper story fraternity house window at the University of Idaho within approximately a 2-week period. This struck me as an astonishing coincidence. I looked into the matter and found that indeed a 20-year-old man named Shane Meyer had fallen from the third floor window of the Delta house just 12 days before Andaverdi's fall from SAE. Not surprisingly, the police reported that alcohol may have been a factor. He too had been airlifted to Seattle, and incredibly, the two fought for their lives in the same critical care unit at Harborview Medical Center. I became intrigued by this kind of injury and began to do more checking into the subject. I discovered that 2 months after Andaverdi's fall, a 20-year-old student from Washington State, quite intoxicated, in the laconic assessment of a local cop, pitched forward and fell from a third-floor window of Alpha Kappa Lambda, escaping serious injuries when his fall was broken by an SUV parked below. That these three events were not greeted on either campus by any kind of clamour and sense of urgency that they were, rather met with a resigned sort of here we go again attitude by campus administration, and with what appeared to be the pro forma appointment of an investigative task force, sparked my interest. And so it was that I entered the bizarre world of falls from fraternity houses, which, far from being freakish and unpredictable events, are in fact regular occurrences across the country. And this will literally go on, this article, to speak about the many, many injuries, the many, many situations where young adults in these sororities are gravely injured, and you have a relationship between the colleges, around the law enforcement agencies that look to try to downplay the importance of this and pass the buck. So when we look at the Idaho 4 case and we hear that there are these fights, there's these issues, there's people that are losing their life. We've heard on the peripheral of the Hudson Lindau case, Hannah Clary, people like that, all on the peripheral that have connections to the individuals in this case. If you believe what you're being told in the many pieces of information online, which it's becoming harder and harder to, but that's by and by. The point being that you have this situation where you have Brian Koberger, this outsider, who I don't think anybody can truly pinpoint how he was actually found at all. Yes, he's pled guilty. So many people think that that's the nail in the coffin. He pled guilty. Of course he did it. Completely ignoring the existence of the Innocence Project and the fact that people who don't want to die can plead guilty to crimes. And we could later on indeed see a resurgence in interest in this case that would lead to potential exoneration of Brian Koberger. He may have done it. I'm not saying that he didn't do it or he wasn't involved in this, but even if we want to look at this case in a sense of, okay, Brian Koberger did it, but what happened in the aftermath of him doing it? Did all of the actions and activities that played out in the aftermath of these individuals being attacked, did that play out right? Are we wrong in looking at the likes of Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk and putting blame onto them for their story that seems fucked because it changes every time you hear it again? Is it in fact not these individuals, but the umbrella with which they sit under, which is the sororities and the fraternities? And it's a hard one, you know. But what I will say is the people who have come to conclude that this was not Brian Koberger, it was in fact a gang, drug gangs or things like that, retaliation for something the parents did. I'm not saying that that's beyond the realms of possibility, but I'm just asking you to consider, when you look at the evidence in terms of universities, sororities, fraternities, the powerful, powerful nature of what these are. These are businesses. These are businesses where members go on to be senates, to become presidents, to become some of the richest people in the world. They have a brotherhood that is which I spoke on and other people have spoke on, they have a secrecy policy akin to the mafia. Akin to the mafia. What happens in the fraternity and the sorority stays in the fraternity and the sorority. They will take lies, they will take things to their grave before allowing people outside of these institutions to figure out or find out what happened. So Brian Koberger, is he guilty? Who knows? But what I do know, and I don't think anyone can deny, is we haven't been shown that he did this crime beyond a reasonable doubt and shown all the evidence to support his guilt. So we are satisfied in that this is the person who did it. And look, you can clearly see it. You can clearly see it. It's so clear. Again, as aforementioned, I don't think anybody can truly pinpoint the exact point that law enforcement got to Brian Koberger himself. I believe that someone pointed the finger. He was chosen as the person who did it. Now, again, I don't know whether he was involved or not. Maybe he was. Maybe there was other people. I don't know. All I do know is the fact that I don't know is problematic. And when you look at what we've just discussed here, the powerful nature of these college setups, who do you generally or genuinely think has the power to kill, to hide, to pay, to financially compensate those who have been affected to the point where they would happily walk away? Even some of the people around this, the parents, the people who were involved in the trial itself, or the courts and the journey towards trial, they themselves are fraternity and sorority members. Been there. Ann Taylor, sorority girl. There you go. Let me know what you think down below. What camp are you in? Camp Brian? Camp D-Rugs? Cartels? Gangs? Or are you looking at the college and this setup with more and more scrutiny, as the more that comes out, the more they are put under the spotlight? Love you all. Mwah.